Chapter 4 A Night Adventure. It was night, and the Trojans had not returned home, but lay encamped on the open plain. The defeated Greeks, huddled inside their camp, could hear the pipes and singing of their triumphant enemies, who were drinking to Hector and a speedy end to the war. In fulfillment of his promise to Thetis, Zeus had given victory to the Trojans. Agamemnon had been forced to implore the help of Achilles and to offer him a part of his kingdom in addition to the return of Briseis. Achilles, however, would not be moved. "His anger is beyond all reason," said Odysseus, who had been the king's ambassador. "Your seizure of Briseis is only one cause of his burning resentment. He complains that though he has done most of the fighting, he has always been slighted, and he takes no account of the fact that other kings are older and wiser than he." "I have injured him," admitted Agamemnon, "but by nursing his fury while we face utter defeat, he has put himself in the wrong. What shall we do when the day breaks and the Trojans attack us in our camp?" "We cannot wait here until day," replied Odysseus. "We must do some desperate deed that will give heart to our men. Let me take Diomede and steal into the Trojan lines. 2 men might pass through their sentries and cause confusion, or at least gain news." Agamemnon nodded. "If any man can help us, you are he. I have not forgotten the ambush you set by the Trojan gates this last winter, crawling out with a few volunteers to lie in the snow in the marsh by the riverbed half the night long. I wonder you did not die of the cold." Odysseus laughed. "I almost did," he admitted, for the others had taken thick cloaks, whereas I trusted in my hardiness and had nothing but the leather jacket I wore instead of armor for better concealment. In desperation at last I made up a message to be sent back to camp and asked for a runner to take it. He of course left his cloak behind to make better speed, and by doing so he saved my life, though not in the way he expected. "I believe you would come back safely from inside the very gates of Troy," declared Agamemnon with a smile. "Diomede and I will return tonight, never fear. See, the fires have died down in the Trojan camp, but out on the right there are torches and the sounds of much movement. Something is happening about which we should find out before dawn." As the bustle in the Trojan camp died to silence, 2 figures slipped quietly out of the rows of Greeks' huts, passed the sentries, and vanished into the dark. When night fell, the victorious Trojans had halted where they were on the edge of the plain. Hector was raging like a lion whose prey had escaped him. "Let the men build fires where they are," he commanded, "while food is brought out from the city. When they have eaten and drunk and are rested, we shall fall on the Greek camp in spite of the darkness." "Hector, in defeat you are as firm as a rock, but in victory you are too hasty," declared young Achilles, his cousin, who was wise beyond his years. "There is a palisade and a trench around the Greek ships, and we do not know the entrances. Moreover, Achilles will never let us burn the ships, but will fall on us with his fresh men when we are inside the stockade and will trap us there in the dark." "If we take no risks," retorted Hector, "we shall lose our opportunity. Look at the lights and confusion in the Greek camp ahead of us. I believe they are launching their ships, and will make off unpunished while we wait here for day. Send out a scout to make sure before you risk the whole army." "Very well," replied Hector unwillingly. "If any man dares go alone, I will do so. Who will risk his life for his country in her hour of need?" "I will," cried a thin, dark man from the back of his audience. "I will go if you offer a reward." "Dolon the wolf," cried Hector, "you are well named for one who does deeds of daring in the night time. What reward do you seek? Gold, the life of an enemy, some Greek king for your slave?" "Kings make poor slaves," said Dolon sourly, "and dead men bring no profit. Nor do I need gold, since my father is rich, and I am his only son." "Choose what you wish." "Give me the horse of Achilles," he said eagerly, "the undying horses that the king of the sea gave to Peleus for a wedding gift. They are white as the foam on waters and run swift as the wind. To possess them I will risk my life." "You ask a great prize," said Hector soberly, "but if you can bring back news, you will have earned it." "I am not called the wolf for nothing," boasted Dolon. "I shall wrap myself in a wolfskin with its head thrown over mine, and crawl on the ground past the sentries. Who will think I am a wolf or stray dog? Fear nothing for me. I shall return with Odysseus's head at my belt perhaps, or even Diomedes." "Such heads are not easily come by," answered Hector, smiling. He raised his voice suddenly. "Who interrupts our council?" he demanded. "What man is here?" "It is a shepherd from the foothills of Ida," cried a voice. "He brings news of a mighty army marching to our aid." "Let him come forward," demanded Hector. "Now, man, what is this tale?" There was a great noise in the thickets, stammered he, and we thought it was the Greeks, but it is not. They speak Thracian. Did you see them? I saw a tall man who gleamed like a god in a chariot of gold. His horses were white as the snow, and they bore on their foreheads Gorgons' heads, shaped out of gold, with tinkling bells set around them. There were long lines of chariots behind him, and spearmen and archers and slingers. It was an endless host. It is Races, the Thracian, cried Hector. He comes in the nick of time, for with his help victory is certain. He is a great hero, and a goddess was his mother. How far away is he? Not far, answered the shepherd. I came over the hills where his men could not follow. They are marching quickly and will be here before long. I must go welcome them and guide them, cried Hector. They shall camp to the right of our army and join with us in the onslaught at dawn. Farewell, Dolon. Good luck to your errand. We need even more than before to learn what may be afoot. The plain between the two armies lay dark and silent. Here and there deep patches of blackness marched bushes, in whose shadows an unweary walker might trip over the bodies of men, since the dead of the last day's fighting lay scattered over the plain. Odysseus and Diomede heard someone ahead of them stumble heavily, and curse as he did so. Dolon was taking no special pains to be quiet, since the Greek outposts were far out of earshot. Lie down and let the man pass, whispered Odysseus. Then we can chase him into our sentries if he is too quick for us. The two flung themselves down by the side of the path, arms spread wide and bodies twisted like dead men they had seen. Dolon passed them without a glance, whistling a little between his teeth to keep his courage up. The two Greeks watched him pass before they scrambled to their feet and made after him. Dolon halted and turned, for he supposed his pursuers must be messengers from the Trojan camp, and in spite of his boasting, he was not unwilling to be recalled. It was not until the men were almost upon him that he saw their weapons gleam. With a sudden cry, he fled wildly, attempting to dodge them and regain his own lines. It was unfortunate for Dolon that both his pursuers were famous for their running. Try as he would, he found himself driven towards the Greek sentry post. Presently, a spear flashed over his shoulder and stuck quivering in the ground in front of him. He stopped, trembling, and the two were upon him, gripping him roughly by the arms. Dolon's knees gave way beneath him, and he collapsed in his captor's hands. "Take me alive," he gasped, imploringly. "My father is rich and will pay any ransom." "Talk first," said Odysseus sternly, "and bargain afterwards. Who sent you, and what are you doing?" Dolon was shivering all over, and words poured out of him almost too fast to be understood. "I will tell you anything you want, and my father will pay ransom. Hector sent me to see if the Greeks were planning flight in the dark. I did not want to come, but he promised me the white horses of Achilles if I brought news." Odysseus laughed shortly. "You are hardly the man for those horses," he said. "Achilles himself finds them difficult to master, and he is a stranger to fear. But now tell me where Hector sleeps, and whether there are guards on watch around him." "Yes, there are sentries," stammered he. "I cannot tell where Hector lies. Indeed, I cannot." "It were better for you if you had known," said Diomede threateningly, lifting his sword. With a great bound, Dolon jerked himself half free and fell on his knees on the grass. "Spare me, he implored. Hector left to greet Races, the Thracian, and guide him to the right of our lines. Who is this Races? He is a great king with snow-white horses and chariot and armor of gold. I saw him come in as I was making myself ready. He was a huge man who shone like the golden Apollo. His men were all travel-stained and weary, but he looked like a god." "On the right, you say?" mused Odysseus. "If his men are weary, they may not set a good watch. It would be a great deed to slay this Races and carry off his horses, for without a leader his men will go home." "I will give you the watchword," babbled Dolon. "It is Phobos. You can tie me here until you come back. I will make no noise." "Indeed you will not," said Diomedes grimly, lifting his sword. Dolon put up his hands with a gasp, but it was too late. The weapon hit him where the neck joined the shoulder, and he fell in the dust. Diomedes stooped to gather up the wolf's skin. "We will return this to Hector," he said. "They will need it, perhaps, when they next send out a spy." The Thracian men, thrusting in Hector's assurance of victory, had posted no sentries. They lay on the ground in orderly rows, each man by his horses. In the middle slept Races, his golden armor piled at his feet, and the gleaming chariot a little to one side. His horses were unharnessed, but tied with stout leather thongs to the chariot rail. "These are twins to the horses of Achilles," whispered Odysseus in awe. "I did not know that any other hero on earth owned such creatures." "You and I will own them tonight," answered Diomede. "Let me fall on the king and raise confusion about him, while you loosen the horses and drive them out of the throng." He drew his sword and ran lightly through the ranks of the sleepers, raising his weapon over the king. He struck. There was a groan, and the charioteer who slept by his master leaped with a shout. All around in the darkness men jumped to their feet, seized weapons, and hit out blindly. Over the body of the king a terrible tumult rose. Meanwhile, Odysseus was struggling with the thongs that tied the frightened horses, for he dared not cut them loose, lest he have nothing with which to control the beasts. Fortunately for him, men thought him a charioteer who lay dying beside his master. The horses were leaping and plunging as he wrenched at the knots he could not see in the dark. A torch lit up the scene and silhouetted Odysseus. With a fearful yell, the crowd surged towards him, just as the thongs parted to a final desperate heave. There was no time to reach for the whip, which stood in its socket in the chariot. Odysseus flung himself on the back of the nearest horse, snatched his bow from his back, and brought it down over the animal's haunches. The horse neighed wildly and leaped into the crowd, dragging his teammate with him. People scattered, and Diomede, breaking hastily loose from his enemies, caught the horse by the mane. Odysseus seized him and hauled him up in front of himself, 2 on one horse, with the other beast thundering beside him. They raced off into the dark. Next morning the Thracian men set off sorrowfully for their home. Strange horses drew the bright golden chariot, and the body of Chryses was not with him. His goddess mother had carried it away and laid it in a cave where he might sleep forevermore, glorious in his life. Over his body the nymphs made lament for the sorrows of an immortal mother who had borne a child that must die.
Part 3, Chapter 5. The Death of Patroclus. When the dawn goddess arose and brought light, Zeus sent out fierce discord to stand by the ships and cry aloud in a terrible voice, that the hearts of the fighters might be strengthened for war. Agamemnon summoned his host, while on the high ground in the center of the plain the Trojans gathered about Hector, who shone in bronze like a star. Like a pack of wolves, the Greeks rushed from their huts to clash together with their enemies on the edge of the plain. In the center of the battle, fierce Agamemnon slew Isus and Antiphus, 2 sons of Priam, whom Achilles had once taken prisoner on Ida, but set free for a ransom. Now Agamemnon hurled them from the chariot and stripped off their armor, for he knew who they were and wished to triumph over their father. Next, Iphidamas, a son of Antenor, struck at the king with a spear, but Agamemnon caught the weapon with his hand and jerked furiously. As Iphidamas stumbled forward, still holding the spear haft, Agamemnon smote him on the neck with his sword. Iphidamas's brother, with mad fury at his loss, now thrust sideways at Agamemnon through the press and pierced his arm. As the Trojan stooped to pick up his brother, Agamemnon stabbed fiercely at him under his shield, so that he fell on the corpse of Iphidamas and died. Blood spurted from the wound of the king Agamemnon, and he called for help to his charioteer, who was hovering on the edge of the battle. When Hector saw the king depart for the ships in his chariot, he cried aloud to encourage his men and rush against Diomede, who was covering the king's retreat. A spear struck the Trojan full on the helmet, knocking him backward, half stunned. Before he could recover, an arrow from Paris's bow had wounded Diomede, forcing him also to retire from the battle. Odysseus now stood alone in the center of the line, hemmed in like a wild boar who is baited by huntsmen and hounds. 5 men he slew, but the spear of the 6th pierced right through his shield and bright breastplate and tore into his side. Odysseus shouted terribly in anger, while the Trojan turned to escape, dismayed at what he had done. With his full strength, Odysseus hurled his spear after the man and hit him full between the shoulders, stretching him face down in the dust. When they saw the blood stream from the side of Odysseus, all the Trojans crowded fiercely about him, and the hero lifted his voice in a desperate call for help. At that, Menelaus and Ajax rushed forward. Ajax held back the throng with his gigantic strength, while Menelaus helped Odysseus out of the battle. Meanwhile, Hector, who had departed from the center, was spreading havoc far off on the left by the banks of the Scamander, where Nestor and his young son, Antilochus, were leading the Greek host. Here, Macon was wounded, a hero whose life was most precious to the heroes, since he was more skilled in medicine than any in the host. Nestor himself took Macon on his chariot to drive him back to the ships. Achilles was standing by the stern of his black ship, listening to the din of the battle. In his heart he had repented of his anger since the time that Odysseus had offered him terms in the name of King Agamemnon. Nevertheless, his pride held him back, even now, while the fighting was moving steadily nearer. He made no movement to help, but turned to Patroclus, his dearest friend, who had come with him from Greece, and whom he loved better than life. "Go and ask old Nestor who is wounded," said he anxiously. It seemed like Macon, though I could not see his face. Patroclus needed no urging, but shot past the ships like an arrow in search of old Nestor. Achilles leaned back against the ship and looked at his men. Today they were not playing with javelins or quoits, but sat each in the door of his hut, silent and clad in full armor. The battle had reached the palisade and the trench. Trojans were pouring through the gateways and over the wall like the sea. Ahead of them rushed Hector, shouting to his men to leave the huts and the plunder and make for the ships. Behind him came Helenus, Deiphobus, Inus, and Sarpedon, the leader of the Trojans' allies. In front of the ships, the desperate Greeks made a wall of shields, behind which the slingers of Ajax the less shot thick and fast into the Trojan throng. These came on, however, like a great storm of wind, and broke into the ranks, man against man, until many heroes fell in the dust. At last the Greeks fell back from the foremast ships, except for Ajax the giant. Hector laid his hand on the prow of the nearest, which was that of Prostelus, who had been slain long ago at the landing. "Bring torches," he shouted. "Throw fire on it." Men rushed forward with flaming sticks, even as Ajax leaped up on the deck with a great pike in his hands and stabbed fiercely down on his attackers. The Greeks rallied again. Some jumped up by Ajax with axes and hatchets and great double-pointed spears. Now, however, the Trojan slingers and javelin throwers made havoc among the men exposed on the decks. Presently, Ajax gave ground to the oarsman's bench in the middle of the ship, which was protected by bulwarks. He still fought furiously from thence, but smoke poured from the unguarded bows. From the far end of the beach, Achilles watched the fire grow with increasing disquiet. Patroclus came running back from the huts to appeal to him. "Diomede, Odysseus, and Agamemnon are wounded," cried he. "Ajax alone steadies the line. One ship is burning already, and soon the whole mass will follow. Without ships no man will escape to Greece alive." There was a silence for a moment. "The gray, cold sea was your mother, not Thetis," said Patroclus reproachfully. "Have you no more pity than rock?" "No man can be angry forever," said Achilles heavily. "Although I myself have sworn to defend nothing but my own ships, you may lead my men into battle so that their fresh strength may turn the tide. I will lend you my armor, for if the Trojans think I am with you, they will fall back in dismay. Drive the enemy from the camp, but return after that, and do not pursue them over the plain. Because of my quarrel with Agamemnon, I would not have the Trojans brought to utter defeat." The battle for the ships was decided in an instant, when the yelling horde of the Myrmidons took the Trojans suddenly in the flank. In front of them raced Patroclus, drawn by Achilles' white horses and wearing the star-studded breastplate and the helmet of the hero himself. With a cry of dismay, the Trojans scattered, and many of them were cut off by the wall and the ditch over which they had leaped so eagerly. Patroclus pursued these among the huts and the ships, while other Greeks threw water on the half-burned vessel of Patroclus. The Trojans soon rallied around Hector and Sarpedon and Patroclus at the head of the Greeks and rushed on them like a roaring fire. Now the heart of Zeus himself, high in heaven, was dismayed, for Sarpedon was his own son, born to him by a mortal princess. Even Zeus, however, would not interfere with the laws of the fates, and Sarpedon fell to the spear of Patroclus, as an oak falls to the shipwrights' axes out on the hills. Thereupon the allies of the Trojans fled in dismay at the death of their leader, and the forces of Hector followed headlong over the plain. The battle for the ships was won, and the camp was safe, but Patroclus, disobeying the commands of Achilles, rode after the Trojans, stabbing and slaying far out over the plain. All the way back from the camp to the city, the ground was scattered with corpses, for not until they were under the gates could Hector rally his men. At last the Trojans stood firm and stopped their pursuers, even driving them back a little way. Hector now bade his charioteer lay the lash to his horses, and he tore right through the ranks of the fighters against the chariot of Patroclus. The latter, leaping to the ground with his spear in his left hand, seized a sharp stone that he hurled full at Hector's charioteer, striking him dead to the earth. Hector sprang down with a shout to bestride his friend's corpse, but Patroclus also darted forward, hoping to strip off the armor and wear it in triumph. Hector seized his comrade by the head, and Patroclus grasped him by the foot, while over his body Greeks and Trojans joined madly in battle. A roar arose from the Trojans like the sound of a storm at sea. Patroclus gave ground while Hector leaped over his friend's body and stabbed with all his force. With a great crash, Patroclus fell. Hector looked down on him, crying, "Patroclus, fool that you were to think that you could bring my blood-stained armor to the tents of Achilles! You shall never go home to the ships to tell him who is the better man." "Boast over me now," answered Patroclus faintly. "When Achilles hears you have slain me, you will not live long." "Who knows?" cried Hector, exulting. "These are the days of my glory, and perhaps Achilles himself will fall to my spear." The soul of Patroclus left his body and fled, wailing, while Hector bent to strip him of his armor, and over him the battle was joined more fiercely than before. Part 3, Chapter 6. The Death of Hector.